Shalom everybody. Welcome to this very, very special event, lecture together. It's not even a lecture, it's like a Verbringen. When Walter is here, it's a Verbringen. And we stand now between two very special days. Yom Zikaron HaShoah, remembering the Shoah, the Holocaust. And tomorrow night is going to begin the Yom HaZikaron for the Chalalei Tzahal, for our soldiers of the IDF that have passed away, and those that were unfortunately murdered as a result of the terror over here in Eretz Yisrael. When we talk about Yom HaZikaron, the Remembrance Day, what does that remind me of, Walter? The mitzvah in the Torah, Amalek. Amalek, they did terrible things to Am Yisrael. On one hand it says, Zachor, remember, always remember what Amalek did. And then you say, Machot Timche, you have to erase what Amalek did. So make up your mind. Do you have to remember, or should you erase it? I don't have the magic answer to this, but I'm going to suggest something that I hope Walter is going to agree with me. On one hand, we have to remember what Amalek did. We have to remember how evil they were in order to uproot that evil. How do we do that? The best way is Zachor et asher asa l'cha Amalek. The answer lies in this word. Remember what Amalek did. How do we remember? Through asiyah. We can remember what Amalek did through action. When we do, Walter, when we do positive action, we are erasing the evil. So for example, in 1956, the head of the U.S. Federation in New York came to the Rebbe. The Rebbe was a very young Rebbe at the time. And he said, I'm going around the different Jewish leaders. It was only 9 years, give or take. It was 11 years after the Holocaust. And he said, we want to institute from now on that in every Seder there should be an extra empty chair. To remember each empty chair will remind us, that we'll remember one of the 6 million that perished, that were brutally murdered by the Nazis in Yimach Shemam. And he said to the Rebbe, if you're one of the Jewish leaders, if you will sign on such a petition, if you will sign this, then world Jewry will follow. This room back there, there's a couple more chairs.
Someone close that window, please.
It's a great idea. The air conditioning will work much better. In 2 minutes it will be a little more stuffy, but then it will be more comfortable afterwards. And he said to the Rebbe, if you will sign this petition, then Am Yisrael will follow. So the Rebbe became very serious and he said as follows. I like the idea of adding another chair, but I disagree with having an empty chair. I vote that you should fill the chair with an additional person who may not have a place for the Seder without you. Moreover, he may not have a place, he may not even know that it's Pesach tonight. He may not know that on Pesach night we need to eat matzah. And if you fill this chair with this individual, you will be doing good action. I'm paraphrasing, of course. And there's no question that this is the best counter-response to Hitler, Yimach Shemo v'Zichro. If he knows that another Jew, and each and every one of us takes one more. And so, I think this is the answer. We're going to talk about now Walter's first personal account of what he remembers. I remember Walter told us about how he saw himself, Hitler Yimach Shemo, in his town, in the square of his town, talking to all of the Nazi youth, Yimach Shemo v'Zichron. He remembers himself experiencing Kristallnacht, what led up to the Holocaust, obviously during the Holocaust, and of course participating in the liberation after the Holocaust. This is part of the Zachor et asher asa, that we have to do action. And Walter is a perfect example for me, on a personal level, every single day. when I meet Walter, I think about Walter, he gives me the push, be'emet. He gives me the encouragement to do more. Because sometimes we look around the world and we see the craziness that's happening, but then we see Walter, shalom shalom, and we see it doesn't stop. Baruch Hashem, Hashem should bless you more and more. He keeps on going, and he keeps on innovating, and he keeps on producing, right, Walter? And he just recently received an award from the Guinness Book of World Records for being the oldest acting reporter in the world who has a radio show, Walter's World, and he writes in the Jerusalem Report, the Jerusalem Post, a big yasher koach for this amazing achievement. Yasher koach. And Baruch Hashem, Walter, you have a lot more to do, Baruch Hashem, and we're very grateful that you're here with us, and you're going to be delivering a very, very unique talk for us. So big yasher koach. In just a minute, this is gonna work. In the meantime, let's do the little warm up. Warm up without it.
So this is different from the other Holocaust stories you saw. This is not a story that moved me here, Holocaust survivors from camps. This is different. I'm going to tell you, how did it all start? How did this evil man come to power? What happens? And also what happened to me at the same time? That's the story. Now, this is called From Prejudice to Oppression, or genocide. So I want you to, during the talk, to try and put yourself into my shoes. When you hear all the things that I'm talking about, and think how you would feel. And when you have questions, I would like to answer them at the very back, at the end, not in the middle to take me off my stride. Maybe you can write them down. I'm sure you have lots of questions in the end. This is all about 10 years of my life, from, although I go a little bit earlier, but principally from age 6 to 16. I was born in Germany, in, no?
No. Is that how you say it in German? One second.
It's not there.
Hold the Seder. Eliezer, I'm glad you're here. Here we go.
Yeah?
I just said Eliezer, boom. Went on.
No, I want to match.
It's coming. There we go. Yeah. Thank you, Eliezer. Thank you.
I was born in Germany, in a town around here. This is the border with France, near here, and this is the River Rhine that goes up to Holland. So that's where Berlin is over here, of course, and Frankfurt is up here. So I was marching. This is on the way to Switzerland. That's where I come from.
Which town?
The town is called Karlsruhe. Anybody knows it. So I'm going to start after World War I. There was World War I, and the Allies won, and the Germans lost. I must put my glasses, I should have. And at the end of the war, they had a peace treaty, which was signed in a place called Versailles, in a railway carriage. And this Versailles Treaty was very damaging to Germany. They had to give up areas, they lost their colonies, they had to, all the heavy industry in Germany, which was dismantled and taken away to England and to France. So then there was no more work. I'm talking about that was in 1918, and I'm talking about the period between 18 and later on in 1930. there were 6 million unemployed, of course, after the war, as well as the disheveled German soldiers who came back from the war depressed because they'd lost the war, and with unemployment, with no work. No work is no money. No money, no food. No food is trouble. If you have no food, that starts problems. And all these disillusioned ex-soldiers stood on the street corners, hooligans. They didn't know what to do. Now, there were 34 political parties in Germany at the time. And each party had an ism, a philosophy, ism, centralism, communism, socialism, and everybody was telling them to vote for the party, and they gave all the philosophical stuff about their parties. And the people in Germany were not interested. They had nothing to eat, so they wanted work and bread. And Hitler said, his party came and said, vote for me and I'll give you work and bread. Well, that's exactly what the people wanted. Said, oh, that's what we wanted. And that's how eventually, via several elections where he didn't quite make it, to become, in the end he was democratically very well in with two industrialists who were previously the armaments manufacturers, Krupp and Tyson, and they supported him again. You support me, we build factories, they had money, but they built up the factories again and started making ammunition. And also, he started building the autobahns, the motorways. Now, any motorway you see today is all modeled on the German autobahn. The only difference is that we're building here in order to relieve traffic, ring roads and other things, and they built the autobahns strategically because the aim already was to expand Lebensraum. It was going to expand. Anybody else speak German? I know one person speak German. Anybody else? No? Okay. They needed living space, and they knew that they wanted to expand mainly to the east. So that's the kind of Germany there was after the war. But Hitler, of course, couldn't do with a normal democratic state. So the first thing he did, he wanted to get rid of the Parliament building, to dismantle democracy. So the Parliament building, the Reichstag, they set alight, they burned it down, and they put the blame on a feeble-minded Dutchman called Van der Lubbe, who got hanged for it, I think, or shot for it. He was a communist. So with one stroke, he tried to dismantle democracy, and at the same time started saying, the communists did it. So, because that was his big thing, fighting communism. And anyway, and they had, for a short while, they had a parliament in the Opera House, but then that stopped. And then he stopped, he took a lot of civil liberties away from people. And in fact, soon he got into power in January. In October of that year, 1933, he left the League of Nations. League of Nations were the forerunner of the United Nations, and they obviously told him certain things he did were not in line with the principles of the League of Nations. So what did he do? He said, "Go, I leave you. Goodbye." And he left. This is exactly what we should do today with the United Nations. To leave them. That's what he did. They tried to tell him what to do, and they tell us what to do. I don't want to go and digress, but that's what we should do. And that was what happened. Now, I went to school. I think I have to have a rest. I went to. Okay.
Very
I
fancy.
have to keep getting up again eventually. I went to school 6 years old in 1930, long before Hitler came to power. By the way, I must tell you, I was born in January 1924, which makes me now in my 99th year of life.
Uncle Sam, Uncle
Sam. 98 and nearly 98 and a half. So I experienced all those things. So I started going to school for 3 years before Hitler came to power. The system of government was called the Weimar Republic. And then Hitler came to power, and while I was in the first 3 years, you know, I was one of the boys in the school. I got the ball when they changed in the schoolyard, and it was quite normal. And then Hitler came to power, and then it changed. You could feel it. Everything changed. Because the teachers had their instructions, what to do, and how to teach, and of course the young people were all, the youngsters in my class, they all had to go to the Hitler Youth, where they were indoctrinated, because the Hitler Youth, if you didn't send your child to the Hitler Youth or the girls' movement of the Nazis, then you might have lost your job. They'd say, oh, look, he doesn't send his children to the Hitler Youth. So then things changed for me. After I had already learned to read and write, not changing. It should be changing on this button. Ah, that's the wrong button. This one. Yeah, so after I had already learned to read and write, they decided that there is a German way of doing it. And it was invented by a man called Sütterlin, and this is the system. I had to relearn all the writing.
I think it skipped one.
Yeah, this is him. Yeah, back. I had to relearn all. Look at it. You read it? I'll give you an example. Capital P, Q, R, S, T, U, a V, and that's a W, and that's a Y, and the same with the lowercase, K, and F, D, E, F, that's E. Imagine when you already learned at school and suddenly you have to relearn. That is all part of the denazification, where I lived. It was near the French border. We had I spoke with a local dialect, German, and there were a lot of French words, in the language, and all those had to be changed. There was portemonnaie, which is a little money purse, that had to become a German word, Geldbeutel. There was trottoir, which is sidewalk for pedestrian walk. That had to be changed to Bürgersteig, another German word. So all these things had to be changed, and they were all made in the German sense. Okay, so I went to school, and as I told you, things changed very slowly. I didn't get the ball anymore, and I was bullied. By the way, I come to that later. But if you think of bullying at school, forget it. For what the Jewish children had to suffer. In my class, in my various classes, I was only in the basic school, which is, you call in America.
Primary?
No.
Public school.
Public school, they call it. The basic schooling, you had to, by law, do eight years. I never got to the 8 years. When I went to so they bullied me. And when I went to the teacher and said, look what Hans did to me here, the teacher didn't act. So it was a sign it was a sign that they could do with me what they liked. I was Hefka, they could do what they liked. This next sentence is attributed to various people, but anyway, they applied it to the Nazis. Applied it to them. Give me a boy until he's 7, and I'll make him my man for life. And if you see what happens in our country here with our neighbors, it's exactly the same thing. Indoctrination from youth, and it sticks. So they had to go to Hitler Youth and learn, oh yeah, well, of course, Hitler's idea was expansion to the east. That one of the Versailles Treaty that I told you about, one of the main stipulations of the Versailles Treaty was you cannot have more than 100,000 men under arms. Well, with 100,000 men, you can't capture the world, can you? So what did he do? He started paramilitary organizations, of which you know one or two, SS, you know, and Hitler Youth, you know. Paramilitary organizations. I have to skip a picture. Oh, here we are.
To the left. Right here to the left.
This one. Paramilitary organizations, and this is the uniform of the Hitler Youth. Now you can have a look and you see that it was structured like a military, from the lowest rank to the highest rank. And they had to also exercise after school, like many paramilitary, we come to them, many paramilitary organizations, and he trained them as soldiers, even a youngster, because he wanted to bring him up as soldier so that he can fulfill his plans of capturing the world. We got another one of those today in the world. So that's what now. Yeah, you see, all the paramilitary organizations, and I will show you some pictures later. There was National Socialist Drivers Corps, National Socialist Flyers Corps. There was sports organizations, all kinds that where people after work had to actually train. I'll show you a chart in a minute when I get there of the people who were the Autobahn navvies, the workers who in the daytime worked with picks and shovels building autobahns, and they had exactly the same. Had in the evening had put on uniforms, and they were exactly the same, and had to train as soldiers. And that's how he got around this restrictions of 100,000 soldiers. Now, all the paramilitary organizations had a ceremonial dagger. Everyone had a ceremonial dagger, part of the uniform, all the different organizations. I had another one, I had to sell it in London, I needed money. But the Hitler Youth also had one. And on their and this is it. There's a sign of the Hitler Youth, and it had this. You could dig it in, but on the blade, and I will pass it round. Careful, it's sharp. Is engraved. You see, blood and honor, Blut und Ehre in German. Blut und Ehre. So now I spoke to children, I spoke to schools all over England, from the north to the south, and it's a similar talk. And then I asked the pupils, what does it mean to you? How do you? And they gave different answers. And I said, I'll tell you, to me, this means the more blood you make with it, the more honor you have. And not only ordinary blood, Jewish blood. Why Jewish blood? Because these guys who went to school with me, and in the evening I saw them marching up and down, exercising, were singing songs. And one of the songs is, and I am not going to sing it, I could, when Jewish blood spurts from the knife, everything goes much better. This is what I had to listen to. When Jewish blood spurts from, that's how I say Jewish blood. Now you can pass this around carefully, and then I carry on.
You put pregnant lady.
This is, and others had other daggers. You came late, those who came late, any questions at the very end, write them down, I'm sure you'll have a lot.
Stay all night with it.
Now, at that time, the German population was about 60 million, and in Germany at the time estimated 500,000 Jews. I don't know, the mathematicians among you can work out what percentage that is, but it's a very small percentage.
Less than 1%.
Very small. And every German knew a good Jew. So now, with 500,000 Jews and 60 million Germans, every German knew one good Jew. We don't mean you. Tell you that after my father lost his job, he was in the printing industry. He had to travel and selling in the villages for my uncle shops and stuff. He had to go in the villages to make a living. And they liked him. He spoke excellent German, of course. Although we were Polish Jews, and both my parents were born in Galicia in Poland, but they were small at the time. You were all young when you were born, weren't you? Okay. Anyway, they said to him, we don't mean you. You're a nice guy, they said to him, people he got to know. We don't mean you. We mean those Polish ones, those Polish monarchs. That's what they... little did they know that he was
one of those.
Very, very much a Polish Jew. So all the Germans knew a good Jew, but they didn't mean him, but collectively they... So that was a very interesting thing. Now, I said he worked for my uncle had his shop, my grandmother's name actually, and let me see. I come to something else. That's also part of the uniform. Here you have it. That was a different version of it. And you can read it here in German, and you have it in English. When the stormtrooper enters the fire, he keeps his courage high, and when Jewish blood spurts under knives, then all goes doubly well, etc., etc., etc. And it's also in German, if you can, those who can read it. Here, in 1933, was the big, wait a minute. I have to go back to that. Was the big boycott, where these Nazis, these were the brown shirts, another organization, not the SS, but the SA, the stormtroopers, who were the guys who stood on the street corners. Oh, they stood, remember I said they stood depressed on the street corners, and then Hitler came along. He needed them, and what did he do? He made them feel big. He gave them each boots, jack boots, and a uniform, and from being depressed, suddenly they were important. They were somebody. They gave them this. I want. I have the boots here of a man that I'll show you about a little later. Wow. One here. Pass it. The other one here. These are, they cost $1,000 $2,000 today or something. They are the finest leather inside and out. They are the boots that belong to the Nazi top chief of the whole of the bigger Hamburg area. I'll tell you why I have this. So they gave them boots, and they gave them uniforms, and then there was somebody big. See, they're not even sold, they're new. And those were the guys who then did the dirty work, like standing outside Jewish shops. Germans, defend yourself. Don't buy from Jews. Defend yourself. We didn't do anything. They should defend themselves from us. So now, what? And this was a big boycott, 1933. And let me give you, by the way, everything I tell you is primary source. Primary source means that I personally know, and if I have experience, and if I didn't, if it's something that I heard from somewhere, I'll tell you. So, now, they stood outside the shops, and let's take a grocery shop, for instance. A woman comes along, a German woman, she says, I want to go in. My grandmother bought here, my mother bought here, I like the shop, I like his goods, I like his prices. He's a nice guy, I want to go in. Okay. She went in. On the way out, what's your name and address? They took names and addresses. The next day it was in the newspaper, these Germans still buy from Jews. Now you can imagine what that did to them with their neighbors, with their friends, and they never went back in again. So it was a beginning of people not going into Jewish businesses, the beginning of a slow economic strangulation of Jewish life. So that was a big boycott. Now, also in 1933, soon after Hitler came to power, there was a law that all the libraries, there was a prescribed number of books that they were no longer allowed. So all the libraries had these books about by Jews, about Jews, nice things. All the libraries had to take off their shelves those particular books and bring them to a certain place in a park. And the private people had to also take those books that were the list off their shelves, because if they get caught with them, they would get heavily punished. And they brought them to the place in the park. Now, I was we Jewish boys used to go to the park, and were there, and there was a place where they had a big bonfire, where they burned all those books. I have a picture here, but that's not the picture that I saw. Here's another boycott picture, you see, where they stood, these brown shirts, outside Jewish shops, and said that they're cheating you, this is a Jew, and they cheat you, and things like that. I like the shop next door, Savotti, because that's a chocolate shop. It was chocolate, I think. Anyway, here, this is a picture of a book burning. You can see Heil and singing, and they, with great glee, the population threw German culture onto the fire. I was there, I saw some, not this one, another one. And they were shouting and Heil and singing, and on the top you can read, Heinrich Heine was a very distinguished German novelist who 88 years before the book burning, he wrote a play called Al-Mansur. It was actually about Muslims, and this is what he said: where they burn books today, they will burn people tomorrow. He said that 88 years prior. And this is what, well, you know, that's what happened. That was the book burning in there. Right at the beginning, they took all the books off and had to burn them. Yeah, 85 years ago. Heine lived from 1792 to 1856. And this play Almansor. Now, the books that were burned were books by Erich Maria Remarque. All Quiet on the Western Front was one of the books. Erich Kästner, the two Manns, Heinrich and Thomas Mann, if you know of them, they're all famous novelists, famous people. Hemingway, Goldsworthy, Wassermann, H.G. Wells, Emil Zola, all those books were burned. Now, something very interesting, the Time magazine in America, at the turn of the millennium, asked its readers who was the person who contributed most to the 20th century. So, naturally, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, even the name Elvis Presley came up. And who do you think was chosen by the readers?
Hitler.
No. Einstein. Albert Einstein. And Einstein's books were burned. Ironic. They thought Einstein was contributed most to the 20th century, and his books were burned. So, shows you the stupidity. He had a Nobel Prize in physics, and anyway, in 1935, they instituted a conscription. Everybody had to join one of those Nazi paramilitary organizations. That was too difficult to explain. The Nazi Party was a separate organization from the paramilitary organizations. I told you, National Socialist Drivers Corps, Flyers Corps, the air raid wardens were organized. The air raid, the people who should close the windows, there's a light showing in the wall, they were also organized.
Just pass the books back.
It's here. It's coming.
Okay. Right. So there was a newspaper. There was a newspaper published, which was. Where's the knife?
It's coming. It's coming.
There was a newspaper published by a man called Streicher, who was the Jew hater. This is a Jew-hating newspaper called Der Stürmer. You see, yeah? And those people who did not get a copy, to make sure that everybody can see it, so in every small village they erected a case where every week, there's a weekly, every week they put this newspaper so that everybody can read it. So you have written around it, the race question is the key to world history. Underneath it says, women and men, the Jews are our misfortune. And on the outside, on the right, on one side, who buys from Jews is a traitor, and so on. And this man called Streicher, he actually was at the Nuremberg trial. I think he killed himself before he was hanged. So that is how they indoctrinated, made sure that everybody knows all about the Jews. The Jews are terrible people. Now, back to my school days. So, through all that time, I had to go to this German school. And I told you before, it wasn't a very pleasant experience. And Yeah, and we had we're sitting on a desk, 2 by 2 on the desk. And I sit next to this German boy. And you know how it is at school, you get copied from each other. So he looked and he copied my work. And he got good marks and I got bad marks. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, when the teacher asked a question, and I lift my finger, I want to answer, and I am not at all sure that I was right. I could have been wrong, but I was never called because you couldn't take a chance that after the Jew knows the right answer. That wouldn't be right. So I was, of course, never called again. And then eventually the school, they organized, the school board in my time decided they can no longer expect this Aryan boy, German boy, having to sit next to this dirty, stinking, filthy Jew. So I was sent to the back on my own. That was another sign that I was different and I was not like them and they could do with me what they liked. This is what happened. This is really what happened. It was a very tough time sitting by myself. That gave, of course, a signal that, you know, I'm not one of them. So I had to go to school. That was the law. And that's the kind of school I went. And in the evening, of course, every evening I had to go to Cheder. We didn't have a Jewish school, so I had to go to Cheder in the evening after school. So that's happened in the school. Now let me see if I find something else. Let's see what I had here. Yeah, then there was a boycott. The guys in the truck, you see, they were socialist local council people in the local council in the area, and they were taken through the town, and then there were these placards everywhere, boycott and so on against Jews, and they were taken. The Nazi guarding them. They're sitting in the truck, and people could throw, I don't know, eggs and tomatoes at them, I suppose. This is not a good picture, but it's a school where the children are taught again from that newspaper, Der Stürmer, all about the Jews. Now, these people, I told you I would show you, this is another of those paramilitary organizations, and if you look at the bottom left, you see a spade. So that's, and on the top it says Reichsarbeitsdienst. So they were the ones who built the motorways, hence the spade. And in the evening, they were soldiers, as you can see. So that's, I have to put it together in a minute. So in the evening, even they were soldiers, ordinary road builders. This is a German song which they were singing because expansion to the east was a thing, and it says, there's some. Do you see in the east morning glow a sign to freedom and the sun? So it was people, even in songs, they were indoctrinated that they have to move expansion to the east. Now, race theory was a very important subject in German schools. There had to be, people had to be taught to recognize inferior races. This is a picture I picked up somewhere, because in every class came a teacher to teach race once a week, to recognize who is the master race. This person happens to be a Romani, from a gypsy. But you see, they had engineers' calipers measuring the size of his nose, and by that they were trying to tell the pupils to recognize inferior races. Now, when I spoke in schools in England, sometimes to 2 classes, 3, 1 class, 50, 100 people, 40 people, I said, now you guys, look around you, and I bet there are not 2 of you who have the same nose. So you see the futility of what they try to do, to teach by measuring the nose who is an inferior race. When people just have different kind of noses. The same in school. Here you have a girl, and he's measuring her head. There's a German girl, and these are all pictures that I actually found in order to illustrate what I'm saying. They measuring the head or measuring up to show it was all physiognomy, it's called, and the feeling the bumps on the head. By the bumps on your head and the measuring, you could tell who's an inferior race. Now I tell you a story which I was told by my late cousin. She was Nifta, but this is what she told me. In her class in school, they also had a race teacher coming in and to explain the race. And at the back of the class, or somewhere in the class, sat this blue-eyed, blonde girls with nice blonde plaits. Very beautiful girl, young girl, school girl, blue-eyed. And he called her forward, and on her he demonstrated how you can recognize a pure Aryan. Well, according to my cousin, she was a Jewish girl. No, such nonsense they thought. That's about race theory, race education. In 1930, and there was a place called Nuremberg, you know the name from the trials, where every year there was a very big rally of Nazis. Thousands of them, each with flags. There's a special place they built there with a concrete podium high up. Very big place. They all stood with their flags, and it was a place where every year Hitler spoke, and it was an important policy speech. And it took him 15 minutes nearly to walk from the back to the front. It was that big, marching from the back to the front to get and make the speech. In 1935, it was all about the Nuremberg laws, the race laws. So there was they published. This is a newspaper from actually from my town. The whole thing, the laws of Nuremberg, and in those laws, all about race, Jews. They said who is a Jew, who is a half Jew, who is a quarter Jew, what a Jew can do. So you could no longer have a dog. You could no longer have a car, you couldn't have a fur coat. And if you had a woman employee in your home, in those days, this will interest you, the ladies, it was all right to have her if she was over 40, because if she was 40 and plus, she was no longer sexually desirable, and she was no longer the kind of person that a Jew would interfere with her. So over 40 in those days. Can you imagine? Your mothers are 40 today? That was one. And then there were a lot of a lot of different, no cars. Jews couldn't go anymore into a cinema. They couldn't. It was everything. Now, let me tell you this. See this chart? This is the chart. Who is a Jew and who is a quarter Jew, a half Jew. Now you see on the left-hand side, he's a German. He can do everything. That it tells you vertically down. He can do everything. And then you have the next one is you have one Jewish grandfather. What you're entitled to do and whom you can marry and what and so on until you got on the far right the full Jew who could do nothing, and a half Jew or three-quarter Jew. And this is the way, part of the Nuremberg laws, and so you couldn't go anymore into. Not everybody had a bath in the house in those days, so you went to a place where they had the bath. You went to, no longer allowed, and you could no longer go to a swimming pool or anywhere. No restaurant. I'm looking for it. Wait a minute. Oh, here. Adverts in the paper. The first one: Jews in the tram in the town. Jews can only stand in the front on the front platform. You can't go inside. You have to stand on the both in the tram on the front platforms. And then it is an article in the paper, Karlsruhe, which is the city I told you where I live. Bath, Judenfrei. It's okay, because you could no longer go. It's okay. Karlsruhe, Bath are free of Jews. No longer contaminated by Jews. You can now go in. In the newspaper, that's the Judenfrei. Judenfrei. You can now go. You can now go in the bath. So this is part of the Nuremberg laws. Let me go back here. This particular page is one which happened after I left Germany, but I put it in. Now, this is this is an identity card. All Jewish men had to have a second name. You were no longer Moses Cohen. You were Moses, I think, Abraham Cohen. The middle name. You had to have it. And women were Sarah. So in order to identify them, all Jews on their identity cards had to have this extra name in the middle. And also, of course, it was printed with a great big J for Judah. Underneath is a soap coupons during the war. This was all after my time in Germany, but I put it in because it's of interest. Soap coupons, and this is for Jews, and if you read the small print on the left-hand side, it'll tell you that Jews got a smaller portion. This is a Jewish portion. There's also a J on the card, so Jews got less soap, and of course that also most probably applies to other things as well. This boy was the ogre, the terrible Jew. This is a passport picture with which I came to England. I thought I was rather good looking. So look, you look at it, a very clean cut boy. It could have been a German boy looking at it. And this was that boy who was suffering in German schools because I was the misfortune and the fault of everything. That's ridiculous. Now, in 1938, in March 1938, Hitler marched into Austria and took over Austria. I once interviewed an Austrian ambassador. For those who don't know, I'm a working journalist and a broadcaster, and I still work and interview personalities and all kinds of people. Anyway, this ambassador told me that they were the first victims of Nazism in March 38. Now, this is a picture of Vienna. Look at them, all cheering the Nazis marching in. You can see, and the flags and the cheering, and then the Nazis marched into Vienna, March 1938, and all these people stood cheering. Here's a group of on the pavement. Look at them. This is a policeman here, an Austrian policeman. And look at them all cheering and shouting. And they were welcoming the Nazis in Vienna, in Austria, all over Austria. That was. Now, I show you that because there was something and it comes an interesting story. Yes, there were many Polish Jews living in Austria, because that, of course, is very low near Galicia, near what is today Ukraine down there. They're all, and so many Polish East European Jews lived there. And when the Nazis moved in, the Polish government, and it was just mentioned, you may have read from time to time here about the Polish government. They don't give back the Jews their houses and things. That's nothing new. The Poles, what they do, they were always anti-Semitic. Because I go back to this, because I was born in Germany, but in those days you did not become a German if you were born there. So I didn't know who I was. I just lived there with, in the religious community, and I didn't know what I was, but apparently I was a Pole. And with that passport, I came to England. And there's another long story there I can't go into. And in England, the Poles had a government in exile in England, and also an army, a wonderful army, very good army and air force. And because I was Polish, apparently I was on the list, and when the time came and I lived in London, after having lived in a kibbutz type place for years, I'll come to that later, maybe with questions. I was called up for the Polish army. So I went there to the office and I said, no, I'm not going into your army. First of all, I've never been to Poland. Secondly, I can't speak Polish. Third, if the sergeant will say turn left, I'll turn right. And finally, and this is really true, I said, and you are anti-Semites, and I'm not going into your army. I said that. What fear? Well, why should I have no fear? And at that time I joined the British Army, but I'll come back to that. So when the Germans marched into Austria, the Polish government was afraid that now all the Polish Jews will want to leave. It was peacetime. They want to leave Austria and go home to Poland. No, we don't want any Jews. The Poles didn't want to. So what did the Poles do? Subsequently, they issued a denationalization law, which stated that all Poles who lived abroad for more than 5 years have to have a stamp in their passports. When the Jews went to the consulate to get the stamp, they refused. So no Jew got any stamps. By the way, don't ask me how it come that I remained Polish, I have no idea. But they were all overnight stateless. All the Polish Jews in Austria were overnight stateless. Now, in those days, the policy of the Nazis was not yet exterminated. There were some camps, but there was not a state policy extermination of Jews, Shoah. So, they had, suddenly the Nazis had all those Polish Jews on their hands, when the idea was, in those days, not extermination, but get rid of them. Let them go out of Germany, out of Austria, get rid. Now, with a stateless passport, you can't go anywhere. You have no status, so they had all those, the Nazis had all those Polish Jews on their plate. What to do? Remember the timeline. Started in March 38, and then came the denationalization law, and then the Nazis decided to forcefully deport all Polish Jews to Poland. Now, it depended on the local Nazi whether they took only men, or men and women, or boys or not boys. That was up to the local Nazi. And they put them into sealed trains and shipped them all to the Polish border. And the Poles didn't let them in. The Poles did not let them in, and the Germans wanted to push them across. So this wretched mass of Jews was in no man's land for about 3 nights, 2-3 nights, I don't know exactly. While the Germans and the Poles argued. Well, the Germans were stronger, and eventually they had to let them in. And there was a border town called, in German, Benchen, and in Polish, Spongin, where a great deal of them, several thousand, went there. I was in another town. At that time I had already, I skipped a bit from the school, maybe I'll come back to it, but we heard that in another town 60 kilometers north of where I lived was another year of schooling for the locals, but my parents managed to get me in, and because we were kosher and religious, I lived in the Jewish Orphanage, which was kosher place. So I was in another town. On the 28th of October 1938, when the Nazis decided to arrest all Polish Jews. I heard there was some kind of a commotion going on in the other town. I contacted home and said, I don't like it, I want to come home. And my mother said, stay where you are, they've just taken your father. Now, I have good pictures and compared with the tie and everything else, but I can tell you that this is my father on the show. Yeah. This man is behind. They were getting soup from this soup kitchen. First World War, big kettle, horse-drawn, wheels, big wheels, and they were all lining up in this border town in Spongin. And had I been in my town, my mother, who, thank God, come to that, lived through the camps and survived, and we were reunited, that's another story, told me, so this is from my mother, she said, when they took your father, they said, you have a son, where is he? And she said, I don't know. I was in the other town. I don't know, he's gone out. If I had been at home, I'd be standing here next to my father. And he, from there, from the border town of Sponchin, he was sent to the Warsaw ghetto, and that was it. So that's the story. Now it goes on. There was a family, and some of this may be familiar to you. There was a family from Hanover, in Germany, who were also deported, same way. And the post service was good, it was peacetime. And they had a son, 17-year-old Herschel, who lived illegally in Paris. Herschel had a postcard from his sister Bertha, who wrote to him and told him of the terrible ordeal that they had to undergo on the border, how terrible it was. Herschel got very upset, got himself a pistol, went to the German embassy in Paris and asked for the ambassador. You can't so easily see an ambassador. So they took him in and took him to the third secretary, a man called Ernst vom Rath. I don't know how he got in there at all, but he did. When Herschel faced Ernst vom Rath, this Nazi third secretary of the embassy, he drew his pistol and shot him. That was on the 2nd, remember the timeline, told you, that was on the 2nd of November of that year. So it started in March in Austria and got through, now we are in November. Not 2nd, 7th of November, 1938. That was the trigger for Kristallnacht 2 days later. How? That the Germans already, all German officers in Germany, Austria, and by then already occupied Sudetenland, that part of Czechoslovakia, had instructions what to do when they get the signal, to burn the synagogues, to do all the different things. They were only waiting for a suitable occasion, and that the Jew shot the Nazi diplomat. That was the occasion. The signals went out. They had lines of communications, telexes, telegram, and 2 days later was Kristallnacht. And you all know what that is. That was the destruction of synagogues all over the place, and also 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and taken to concentration camps, and Jewish property was destroyed, and that was this one. Now, I was in that town, in the other town, and I left from the orphanage to go to school, which was the schoolrooms was behind the synagogue. And as I got nearer and nearer, I could see what was going on. There was smoke, I suppose, and people, lots of people, and Gerida, anybody knows Yiddish. And I got near there. Suddenly I got there, lots of people, and there it was, the synagogue in flames. And the fire service was also, I can stand up again. The fire service was also there, but not to douse the flames, but to cool down neighboring property that shouldn't catch fire. That was it. Well, of course, I walked back to the orphanage, contacted my mother, and said, this is going on. My mother obviously knew from the time where we lived. I said, I want to come home, and she said, okay, come. That afternoon, if you ask me today, what did you have for lunch yesterday? I'd have to think very hard. But I can tell you, I took the 3:22 time 3:22 diesel train in the afternoon to go home. That time sticks in my mind. 3:22 was still, and I went home. So I got home. Now in my hometown, I was very good. How old was I? 14 and a bit. But I was very good with electrical things, and I helped people who had destroyed electrical. Some people who went to America to change the voltage from one to the other, changed the irons and the toasters, and helped in a Jewish restaurant where it was destroyed. That's what I did for a while, and now Warsaw Ghetto, calories. This is what a normal man needs, 2,500 calories. That's what the Germans got. That's what the Poles got. Now, in the ghetto, of course, there was possibility to trade. Anybody knew to put new cardboard on the soles or something. And there was a bit of a trade going on in the ghetto, and people could live and augment themselves. I suppose the 184 calories was potato peels cooked in water or something of that nature. So no wonder in 1941, in the summer, was a very big epidemic. No wonder people were weak. It was a big epidemic, and all the typhus and this, all the big, dangerous sicknesses went around the ghetto, and thousands died. And we have some information from somebody who escaped the ghetto, who told my uncle. How exact it is, I don't know, but he had a date on which he says my father was separated. So we keep that as a outside. Whether it's true or not, it's a date. That's what I keep, and it may or may not be right. And no wonder, because they have very little to eat, and a big epidemic will knock them out. In Russia, they had photographers, and they had a kind of a life in the ghetto until it was the Germans decided otherwise. On the top is a picture of my father in the Warsaw Ghetto. Now he was not in the habit of wearing many sizes too big shirts. You see, there's a big gap. So it shows that he had shrunk. The shirts were okay, but his neck got smaller. So, Kristallnacht. In my town, we had two cathedral-like big synagogues, like the big synagogue next door. Big synagogues. One was an Orthodox one, and one was another. And you can see by the position of the bima, of the place from which the Torah is read, which is which. And we had two steeplers, the two prayer rooms, in which one of those we went to. And after Kristallnacht, the synagogues looked like this. This is the top one is the more religious synagogue, and the bottom one where the scaffolding was the other one. Now you see the bottom, there is a dangerous structure, a bit of a wall standing and scaffolding holding it up so it doesn't damage the civilians who go by. And to add insult to injury, the Jewish community had to pay for the dismantling of the wall. It says so underneath in German. That is what happened. The Jews had to pay for what the Germans did and left the wall standing. There was this big boycott, and nobody went into Jewish shops anymore. So the Jews had to sold their shops for a song for nothing, because they didn't work anymore. Here you have advertisements in the newspaper, top right, this house will go tomorrow into Aryan possession, so it's okay to come. On the bottom left, taking over Aryan shop, and so on. These were the advertisements in the newspapers to say that all these Jewish shops, that was on the top right, that was a big, very big place, the whole house, the whole place. They're all now Aryan, and it's okay, they've been taken over. And the Jews had to give it away for nothing, because that's how it was. That is a picture of me in the British Army.
Whoa.
And this is correspondence I sent to my father and came back. No longer, no longer postal service. An uncle was hit, one of my uncles, the one who brought the Secretariat to Herr Schlomo, was hidden up in the top there. He was hidden there by a non-Jew. This is my wife's family. The little one in the middle was my wife, Shulam, and the father went to Buchenwald, and the mother and the sister went to Sobibor. I never knew my in-laws. I never knew them.
Where did you meet your wife? In London?
In London. And she was saved to Sweden. This is another story with the white buses, one of which you can see in Herr Schlomo, in Yad Vashem.
That's how your mother was saved. You told us on Shabbos. Wow.
Now, I wanted that, I must tell you this. So she was saved and came to a refugee camp in Sweden, and I had leave from the army. She was in southern Sweden, I was in Hamburg. I have to tell you that later if you have questions. In Hamburg, and we met in Copenhagen for the first time. You know, she left me as a 15-and-a-half-year-old relatively naive boy and got me back at 22, an experienced soldier, been through the war. So that was a big one. Anyway, she was in this refugee camp and I went there, and the first morning at breakfast, at the end of breakfast, she said, take this upstairs, a piece of bread, bits of sugar. And I said, no need, Mama, next meal will be exactly the same. No, I could not convince her. This is the window in her bedroom, where there was on the windowsill all these little cups and things full of old food. Then there was a piece of wood over the top, and another 5 stories high was the mentality, in case tomorrow is nothing to eat, you wouldn't want to eat it, you know, after a few days. But 5 stories high, in case that I could not convince her not to, I had to take it up. That was well, there was a pastor, Niemöller, a pastor. He was first a supporter of Hitler, and then he changed and he finished up in a concentration camp. And when he came out, this is what he said. First, they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. And then they came for the trade unionists, and I still didn't speak out because I was not a trade unionist. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for Pastor Miller, very famous pastor. That was said by Edmund Burke, who lived from 1729 to 1797. And that, of course, applies today. And that happened in Germany. This is the Daily Mail, a newspaper, the biggest circulation newspaper in England, and that was in November 1992, about something that happened in Germany. No comment needed. This is a chart of how many Jews in every country perished, and I can finish here. Could it happen again? Yes. Yes, it could happen again. I'm not going to have to finish, but it could happen here, no doubt. We are living in times equal to the 1930s today. And that would bring me into politics. All right.
I have no other words. Just accept a huge applause. Thank you very, very much. Walter, I'm always inspired to hear you and to see you. And B'ezrat Hashem, for many happy years, you should be able to inspire us only in simcha and happy occasions.
Now, any questions? I'm happy to ask. I'm sure I didn't answer all your questions. So somebody will have a question.
I just want to say that you're always welcome to join us over here at Chabad of Rechavia. Anybody wants to leave us your email address, or we have also WhatsApps that we advertise, all things that we do, regular classes every Tuesday night in Chassidut, morning and davening. Davening on Shabbos is amazing. Walter was our chazan this Shabbos. It was very, very special. Spoke at our Shabbat meal. Every Shabbos we have a meal after davening, and you're all welcome to join us.